My name is Marlene, and I'm 44 years old, the mother of the groom, standing at the edge of a wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. I remember that morning vividly. The sun was soft and golden, slipping through the lace curtains of the old country church, brushing everything with warmth. I'd arrived early, carrying a basket of ivory roses, and the steady excitement that only a mother could understand. My son, Isaac, was finally getting married, and I had never seen him so radiant. For years, Isaac had been the center of my world. After my husband passed away when Isaac was 12, I raised him on my own. Every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every late-night talk over burnt coffee and cold pizza, we had survived all of it together. Watching him grow into a man of kindness and determination filled me with a pride I couldn't put into words. And when he introduced me to his fiancée, Cassandra, I truly believed he had found someone who could love him as fiercely as I did. Cassandra was beautiful, in a carefully sculpted way. She spoke softly, always choosing her words as though they'd been rehearsed. From the first moment we met, she carried herself with that kind of delicate charm that made people lean in when she talked. She was respectful, always calling me Mrs. Hayes, even when I insisted she use my first name. I remember thinking how polite and considerate she seemed, the kind of daughter-in-law any mother would be proud to have. Over the months leading to the wedding, I threw myself into planning. I helped choose the color palette sage green and cream, and even found the perfect string quartet through a friend from church. I paid for the catering and half the venue fee, despite Cassandra's insistence that it wasn't necessary. To me, it was more than a financial gesture. It was my way of giving my son the day he deserved. Every detail had my fingerprints on it, from the floral arrangements to the little handwritten place cards. That morning, as guests began filling the pews, I could feel the anticipation swelling in the air. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my pearl necklace, a gift from my late husband on our 10th anniversary. I wanted to carry a part of him with me, to feel like he was there, watching our boy take this monumental step. The church smelled faintly of lilies and fresh wax. The organist played softly as people whispered, their voices blending into a hum of joy and excitement. Isaac looked breathtaking in his black suit. His eyes glowed with that youthful optimism that made me both proud and terrified. When he saw me walking toward him before the ceremony, he smiled that same boyish grin he'd had since he was 5 years old. "You did all this, Mom," he whispered. I squeezed his hand, whispering back, "You deserve it." For a fleeting moment, everything was perfect. Then Cassandra walked in. At first, I thought she was nervous. Her veil trembled slightly as she took small, deliberate steps down the aisle. Her hands clutched the bouquet too tightly, knuckles pale. But when her eyes met mine, something unexpected flashed through them, not warmth, not gratitude, but something sharper. I brushed it off as anxiety. Brides get overwhelmed, I told myself. This was her day, not mine. After the procession, I walked over to help adjust her veil before the priest began the vows. It was slipping slightly off one side, and instinctively, I reached out. "Let me fix this for you, sweetheart," I said softly. That's when it happened. Cassandra jerked away from me so abruptly that her bouquet nearly fell from her hands. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she turned, her voice suddenly slicing through the murmurs of the room. "Get out!" The word hit me like a slap. My hand froze midair. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. But then she repeated it, louder this time, her voice echoing through the church like a crack of thunder. I said, "Get out!" The guests gasped. The organist stopped playing. Isaac's face drained of color. Every eye in that sacred space turned toward me, the mother of the groom standing there with confusion and humiliation twisting inside me. "Cassandra?" I whispered, my voice breaking. She didn't answer. She simply stared at me with a fury I couldn't comprehend. Her bridesmaids rushed to her side, whispering frantically, while Isaac stepped forward, torn between the two of us. The priest lowered his Bible, glancing nervously at the guests, as if unsure whether to continue. Whispers filled the air like smoke. What happened? Did she just? Oh my God, she told his mother to leave? I wanted to speak, to explain, to do something, but my mind had gone blank. My heart hammered against my ribs, and my cheeks burned with shame. I looked at Isaac, searching for help, for understanding, for anything that would make sense of this nightmare. But he looked as lost as I was. Cassandra took a step toward me, trembling but resolute. "You think you can control everything?" She spat, her voice low but venomous. "Even this day. But not anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. I took one shaky step back, then another, until I found myself standing at the doorway of the church. I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. I didn't know what she meant. All I knew was that everyone I loved was watching me crumble in real time. I forced myself to straighten my shoulders and turn toward the exit. And as the heavy doors closed behind me, I knew that nothing about that day or my family would ever be the same again. The church fell silent, every eye snapping toward me as my heart stopped beating for a moment. The echo of Cassandra's scream still hung in the air like smoke after a firework, sharp and lingering. I could hear the faint rustle of dresses, the creak of wooden pews, and a few startled gasps. For a second, it felt like the entire world had frozen around me, suspended in confusion, humiliation, and disbelief. I turned toward Isaac, desperate for him to say something, anything, to make this nightmare make sense. His lips parted, but no words came out. His eyes darted between me and Cassandra as though he were witnessing two strangers instead of the two people he loved most. He took a step forward, then hesitated, glancing toward his bride as if waiting for her permission to move. Cassandra stood there, clutching her bouquet like it was a weapon. Her face was pale except for the furious flush burning across her cheeks. Her jaw tightened, and her eyes, those sharp hazel eyes, locked on mine with a kind of anger I'd never seen before. It wasn't embarrassment or stress. It was personal. "What's happening?" Someone whispered from the front pew. "Did she just tell his mother to leave?" Another voice hissed back. "Maybe it's some kind of joke?" I could hear them all, the voices blending into one another, forming a cruel, buzzing chorus. The bridesmaids looked mortified, glancing between Cassandra and me as if they didn't know who to defend. The priest shifted awkwardly, still holding his Bible mid-air, unsure whether to proceed or pause the ceremony entirely. "Cassandra," Isaac said finally, stepping closer. His voice cracked slightly. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago," she snapped, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm not letting her ruin this day too." "Ruin it?" The words struck deep. My throat tightened, but I managed to whisper, "Ruin it?" "Cassandra, don't," she interrupted, her tone cutting through the air like glass. "Don't pretend you don't know what you've done." I stared at her, completely bewildered. I'd spent months helping her plan this day, making sure everything went perfectly. Every decision, every payment, every late-night text, about flowers and menus, I'd done it for them, for my son. And yet here she was, trembling with rage, glaring at me as though I were the enemy. Isaac turned to her, confusion clouding his expression. "Cassandra, what are you talking about?" She laughed bitterly, the sound brittle and sharp. "Of course you don't see it, you never do. You let her make every choice for us, every decision, even down to the cake flavor. This was supposed to be our day, Isaac, not hers." Her voice cracked on the last word. The guests began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, whispering to one another again. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I tried to take a step toward her. My instinct still to comfort, to calm her down like I would have done for my own child. But when I moved, she recoiled as if I were poison. I stopped in my tracks, realizing that no amount of gentleness would undo this moment. "Sweetheart," I said quietly, "if I've made you feel overshadowed, I'm sorry. That was never my intention." Cassandra's lips trembled, but her expression hardened again. "You always say the right things, don't you? Always play the victim, always the perfect mother." Her tone dripped with venom. "You can't stand the idea that Isaac might not need you anymore." That hurt not because it was true, but because it wasn't. I'd been ready to let my son go, to let him build a life with her. I wanted nothing more than to see him happy. Isaac rubbed his temples, his voice strained. "This isn't the time or the place. Please, can we just—" But Cassandra cut him off again. No, Isaac. This is exactly the time. I'm not marrying you until she's gone. The words sliced through the church. Gasps followed. A few guests rose from their seats, unsure whether to leave or stay. One of the groomsmen whispered something to Isaac, but he didn't respond. He looked utterly defeated, his dream wedding dissolving before his eyes. My vision blurred, the tears finally breaking free. I couldn't stay there another second, not while everyone stared at me like I was the villain of this story. I turned toward the back of the church, my heels echoing against the marble floor. As I reached the doorway, I heard Cassandra's trembling voice behind me. She doesn't belong here. Not today. Isaac called after me, his voice soft and broken. Mom, maybe just go home for now. Please. It wasn't cruel, just tired, defeated. The kind of tone a man uses when his world is collapsing and he doesn't know how to stop it. I wanted to argue, to scream that I'd done nothing wrong. But instead, I just nodded, even though my vision was clouded with tears. I kept walking until I reached the steps outside, the cool wind hitting my face. The church doors closed behind me with a dull thud that felt final, like a seal on something I didn't understand yet. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the quiet street. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass window beside the door, a woman in pearls, standing alone, her son's laughter and music silenced behind her. People would talk, I knew that. They'd whisper about the mother who was thrown out of her own son's wedding. They'd speculate, judge, maybe even laugh. But I didn't care about them. All I cared about was why. Why would Cassandra hate me enough to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew? What could possibly make her despise me this much? I took a shaky breath and stepped away from the church. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a moment of rage, it was something much darker, something that had been waiting to surface for a very long time. I stood frozen, but my mind began racing through every interaction I'd ever had with Cassandra. I replayed every conversation, every smile, every quiet pause between us, looking for the moment when the warmth had turned to bitterness. There had to be a clue, a sign I'd missed. Thought about it, the more small things started to piece together like shards of broken glass. Each one cut a little deeper. Cassandra had always been polite, but in hindsight, her politeness was too perfect, rehearsed, measured, guarded. When Isaac first brought her home for dinner, I remembered how she scanned the house with a subtle, assessing gaze. She complimented my decor, my cooking, even my dress, but there was something distant in her tone, like she was studying me rather than speaking to me. I told myself I was overthinking. She was just nervous, I thought. Everyone tries too hard when they first meet the in-laws. But one moment stood out now, clear as day. A few months before the wedding, Cassandra had stopped by unannounced. Isaac wasn't home, he'd gone on a short business trip, and she said she just wanted to drop off some documents for the planner. I invited her in, offered her tea, and we sat in the living room while rain tapped gently against the windows. As I went to the kitchen to get sugar, I caught a glimpse of her standing by the fireplace, staring at the framed photo of Isaac and me from our first beach vacation after my husband's death. It was one of those candid pictures I had sand in my hair. Isaac was laughing with his arm around me, pure, unguarded love between a mother and her son. When I came back, Cassandra was still staring at it, her expression strange. "It's such a sweet photo," she'd said softly, though her voice was tight. "You two look very close." I smiled, not thinking much of it then. "We are. It's always been just us since his father passed." Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes didn't match the smile. "I can tell," she murmured. That was all she said. She left shortly after, claiming she had errands to run. Now, standing outside that church, I could see what I hadn't seen then: jealousy. The kind that doesn't show in angry words but in quiet resentment that festers and grows. Cassandra hadn't just felt uneasy about me. She had seen me as competition. To her, I wasn't Isaac's mother. I was a rival for his affection. The thought made me sick. How could someone twist something so pure, so maternal, into something ugly? I walked home that day in silence, my heels clacking against the pavement, my mind spinning with fragments of memory. The night Isaac proposed to her, she'd called me first, not to share joy, but to ask pointedly if I approved. The time she invited me to dinner, only to spend the evening subtly mocking the way I seasoned food. The wedding plans I'd offered to pay for, she'd accepted with a smile, then told others I was trying to control everything. It had all been there, right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. When I reached home, I sat down at the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of water with trembling hands. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, pale, drawn, tired. I felt foolish, betrayed, and deeply confused. I had only ever tried to help. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the church, to the way Isaac looked at me when he said, "Maybe just go home for now." Those words replayed endlessly, breaking me a little each time. I wanted to believe that he didn't mean it, that he was just caught in the chaos. But still, he hadn't defended me, not in that moment. Around 3 a.m., I finally got up and went through the wedding gift I'd bought for Cassandra. It was a delicate silver bracelet with tiny initials carved inside a family heirloom from my mother. I had planned to give it to her after the ceremony as a symbol of welcome, of love. Now it sat cold in my hand, unwanted and meaningless. I placed it back in the box and tucked it away in a drawer. As dawn began to creep through the curtains, I sat by the window, sipping cold tea, watching the light grow. Somewhere, deep inside, beneath the pain, I knew this wasn't just misunderstanding or an emotional outburst. Cassandra's words at the altar, "You think you can control everything," hinted at something deeper. A belief she'd been carrying. A story she'd been telling herself about me. But where had that story come from? Had someone fed it to her? Had Isaac said something that made her feel small or unwanted? Or had she simply convinced herself of it, piece by piece, until she believed it fully? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that she had planned her explosion. You don't publicly humiliate someone unless you've already rehearsed it in your head. It was deliberate, calculated, and meant to cut deep, and it had. Still, even through the pain, I couldn't shake one haunting truth. If Cassandra's hatred ran that deep, then this wasn't over. There had to be a reason, a secret, something I hadn't uncovered yet. Something beneath the lace and the smiles and the polite nods she'd worn like armor. I looked at the wedding invitation still pinned to my fridge, the gold letters glimmering faintly in the light. My name was written there beside my son's, with love and gratitude to Marlene Hayes. The words now felt like mockery. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the fridge door, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "You'll find out why." Because deep down, I knew Cassandra's rage wasn't spontaneous. It was the surface crack of something buried much deeper, and I was about to find out just how far it went. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from anger, but confusion. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me, the echo of Cassandra's voice still ringing in my head. "Get out." It replayed again and again, until it didn't sound like words anymore, just venom, wrapped in silk. I tried to tell myself it was stress, that maybe she'd panicked, that maybe the moment had gotten the best of her. But the more I replayed it, the more I realized she hadn't lost control. She'd wanted to hurt me. By morning, I was drained. My body moved on autopilot: coffee, shower, the mechanical rhythm of routine trying to cover the rawness underneath. I'd almost convinced myself to let it go when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Hayes, it's Lacey, Cassandra's bridesmaid. Can we meet? There's something you need to know." Lacey. I remembered her, the tall brunette who'd looked nervous during the ceremony, the one who couldn't meet my eyes as I walked out of the church. My stomach tightened. I didn't reply right away, afraid this might be some cruel follow-up to the humiliation I'd already endured. But curiosity or maybe instinct got the better of me. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe on Oak Street that afternoon. When I arrived, Lacey was already there, sitting by the window, stirring a cup of untouched coffee. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept either. The moment I sat down, she leaned in, speaking quickly, her voice low. "I shouldn't be here. But you need to hear this before it gets worse." My pulse quickened. Worse? She nodded. Cassandra's been saying things about you. To everyone. Even to Isaac. I felt my chest tighten. What kind of things? Lacey looked around nervously before answering. She's been telling people that you tried to control the wedding, that you wanted everything your way. She said you criticized her choices, insulted her family, and made her feel like she wasn't good enough for Isaac. That's not true, I whispered. My voice cracked slightly. I helped plan things because she asked me to. I know, Lacey interrupted, her voice trembling. I was there for most of it. You were nothing but kind. But Cassandra's been twisting everything. She told Isaac you were jealous, that you wanted to keep him for yourself. She even said you tried to bribe her to leave him before the wedding. The world tilted for a moment. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. Bribe her? Lacey nodded again, guilt flashing across her face. She told Isaac you offered her money to end the engagement. She showed him a text from your number. I felt sick. My phone number. My number. That's impossible, I said, gripping the edge of the table. I would never. I believe you, she said, quickly. But Isaac doesn't know what to think. Cassandra made it sound like you were trying to buy her off because you couldn't stand losing control. That's why she snapped at the wedding. She thought everyone would finally see the truth. My throat tightened until it was hard to breathe. The humiliation I'd felt that day suddenly had context. It wasn't a moment of madness, it was a performance. Cassandra had built a story, piece by piece, lie by lie, until she believed it herself. Lacey hesitated, then added, "She's been planning this for a while." She even joked once that she'd make sure the mother-in-law stayed in her lane. I didn't think she meant it literally. I stared out the window for a long time, the street outside blurring into gray. Cassandra's soft voice, her perfect manners, her polite smiles, all of it had been a mask. She hadn't wanted a mother-in-law. She'd wanted a villain. Finally, I looked back at Lacey. "Why are you telling me this now?" Lacey sighed. "Because I can't stand watching her destroy people. She's not who you think she is, Mrs. Hayes. There's something wrong with her. The things she says when Isaac isn't around, it's like she enjoys turning people against each other." I nodded slowly, numb. "Isaac loves her." "I know," she said softly. "That's what makes her so dangerous." When I left the cafe, the afternoon light had already dimmed. I walked home in silence, my mind spinning. Everything suddenly made sense, the cold looks, the distant tone, the explosion at the altar. Cassandra hadn't just wanted to embarrass me, she wanted to erase me from Isaac's life completely. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the faint hum of crickets, the world deceptively peaceful. My heart ached, but beneath the pain, something new began to stir resolve. I had spent years protecting Isaac from pain, shielding him from every storm I could. But this storm wasn't one I could step aside for. Cassandra was clever, manipulative, and dangerous, and she was dismantling my relationship with my son piece by piece. If I stayed silent, she'd win. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages, scrolling through every conversation with her, looking for something, anything that could expose the lies. There was nothing. She had covered her tracks too well. Still, I wasn't going to let her rewrite my story. I turned off my phone, exhaled slowly, and whispered to myself, "You're not done with me, Cassandra." Because now I finally understood Cassandra wasn't just angry. She was calculating. And if I didn't move carefully, I wouldn't just lose my son's trust. I'd lose him entirely. I decided not to confront Isaac right away. I needed proof. Accusations without evidence would only drive him further into Cassandra's web. I'd seen enough manipulation in my lifetime to know how expertly a liar can twist the truth when cornered. Cassandra had already planted her story in his mind. If I rushed in unprepared, she'd make me look like the controlling, meddling mother she claimed I was. So I did what any desperate woman with everything to lose would do. I started digging. The first place I looked was my phone. I scrolled through every message between Cassandra and me. At first, everything looked normal: polite exchanges about flower arrangements, catering choices, and scheduling fittings. But then I noticed something odd. A gap. There were 2 days missing in our message history right before Isaac told me Cassandra seemed off. I hadn't deleted anything, and there was no sign of a system error. It was as if those conversations had been wiped clean. That's when I realized Cassandra had access to my phone once months ago, when I'd left it on the kitchen counter during one of her visits. She'd offered to look up caterers while I was in the other room. I'd thought nothing of it. Now I wondered what else she'd done while pretending to help. Still, missing messages weren't proof, not yet. I needed something concrete. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account, hoping to find a clue that might explain the so-called bribe she'd shown Isaac. My stomach dropped when I saw it. A payment of $2,500 sent to Cassandra's account 3 weeks before the wedding. It was labeled as wedding coordination fee. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I hadn't sent that money. I'd never even heard of such a charge. Panic and disbelief collided in my chest. How could a transaction exist in my name, from my account, when I'd never authorized it? I called the bank immediately. After a long hold, a calm voice on the other end said, "Yes, Mrs. Hayes, that payment was made online through your card number." "But I didn't make it," I protested. "There must be a mistake." "Can you confirm your email address?" the agent asked. When she read it aloud, my blood ran cold. It was close to mine. Only one letter off. But it wasn't my email. It had been created to look almost identical. "Do you recognize this alternate address?" she asked. "No," I whispered, but I already knew who had made it. Someone had created a fake email, linked it to my card, and made it look like I'd sent Cassandra the money. It was elaborate, it was deliberate, and it was evil. When I hung it up, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The anger, the humiliation, the ache of betrayal, it all burned inside me, but beneath it was a cold, sharp clarity. Cassandra hadn't just wanted to ruin my reputation. She wanted to destroy my bond with Isaac, to make sure he saw me as the villain in her story. I printed out the bank records, highlighting every detail that proved my innocence. I saved the transaction ID, the timestamp, everything. I was building my defense quietly, piece by piece, while my heart shattered a little more each day. I thought about calling Isaac, but I stopped myself. Cassandra would be there. And she would find a way to spin this too. I had to wait. I had to be smarter. For the next few days, I went through everything: my emails, receipts, even my social media accounts. Cassandra had been everywhere, subtly altering things. I found messages she'd sent to wedding vendors using my name, making demands I never made. No wonder people had looked at me strangely in the weeks before the wedding. No wonder she'd seemed so calm while I unknowingly took the blame. This wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was a campaign. Each discovery felt like another punch to the gut. I couldn't stop asking myself why. Why go to these lengths? What could possibly drive someone to such cruelty? The answer came to me one night while I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers. Cassandra didn't just want control of Isaac, she wanted control of everything. His money, his choices, his family ties. And as long as I existed in his life, she couldn't have full control. I thought of my husband, how he'd built a modest trust fund for Isaac before he died. Cassandra had asked me about it once, casually, pretending to be curious about family finances. I'd brushed it off at the time, but now I realized she had been probing for information. She wanted access. It all fit. The charm, the flattery, the sudden rage when I wouldn't hand over certain details about Isaac's inheritance. Every piece of her puzzle was falling into place, and the picture it painted was terrifying. I looked at the clock, nearly midnight, and decided then that I wouldn't let her win. I had something she didn't: patience. If she could play her game quietly, so could I. I organized my notes, printed duplicates, and stored them safely. I made copies of my phone data, even took screenshots of the bank emails. I was no longer the broken woman who had walked out of that church. I was someone preparing for war. And yet, even as I tried to steady myself, I couldn't shake the ache of loneliness. Isaac still hadn't called. The silence between us grew heavier by the hour. I whispered into the empty room, "I'm doing this for you, Isaac. You'll see the truth soon." The wind outside rustled the curtains like a quiet response. I stood, turning off the lights, feeling both terrified and strangely calm. Because I knew that fate has a way of revealing the truth, and soon, I'd get my chance to expose Cassandra for who she really was. 2 days later, Isaac called me, his voice shaky, distant, and guilty. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, staring blankly at the cup of tea that had long gone cold when my phone buzzed. Seeing his name flash across the screen made my heart lurch. For a split second, I thought he was finally ready to listen, ready to talk about what had really happened. But his tone shattered that fragile hope before I could even speak. "Mom," he said quietly, "have you seen Cassandra?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I replied, gripping the phone tighter. "Why? What's wrong?" "She's gone," he said, his voice breaking. "She packed a few things, took the car, and just disappeared." I froze. My mind raced through the possibilities. "Did you two fight?" he exhaled heavily. "Yeah, she was accusing me of hiding things, of being secretive, said she couldn't trust me anymore. Then she just left. I've been calling her nonstop, but she won't answer." My heart ached for him. Despite everything Cassandra had done to me, I couldn't bear to hear the pain in his voice. "Isaac, maybe she just needs time," I said gently. "Sometimes people explain she said your name before she left." He interrupted. "Said you'd turned me against her. That you were behind everything." His words sank like stones in my chest. I didn't respond at first. What could I say? Cassandra's reach extended even beyond her lies. She was still twisting him, even in her absence. "I don't know what she's told you, Isaac," I said finally, keeping my voice calm. "But I haven't spoken to her since the wedding." "I know," he said softly. "That's what makes it weird. She kept saying you'd regret it soon." Something cold and heavy settled in my gut. Those words, "you'll regret it," echoed in my mind like a warning. I wanted to believe it was just more of her theatrics, but the way Isaac said it made me uneasy. We talked a little longer before hanging up, both of us drained, both unsure of what to believe anymore. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the phone, knowing deep down this wasn't the last I'd hear from her. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the trees and the street outside turned gold and shadowed, there was a knock at my door. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe Mrs. Keller, bringing over one of her casseroles like she used to when I was grieving my husband. But when I opened the door, the air shifted. Cassandra stood there. Her makeup was smeared, her hair tangled, and her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were rimmed with red. She wasn't crying, though. Cassandra didn't cry. She performed grief like a stage actor, always aware of her audience. "Cassandra?" I said, my voice low. "What are you doing here?" She didn't answer. She just stepped past me, uninvited. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with cigarette smoke following her in. "I need to talk," she said flatly, dropping her purse on my table as if she owned the place. My first instinct was to tell her to leave, that she'd already caused enough damage. But something in her eyes stopped me. There was no remorse, no fear. Only a strange, electric tension. "Isaac's been calling you," I said carefully. She smirked. "Of course he has. He's always so predictable. Poor Isaac, so easy to lead, so desperate to please." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You left him." She laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Because he's a child. Because he still runs to you for everything. Because I'm tired of competing with his perfect mother." Her voice dripped with sarcasm when she said perfect mother. I could see it now, the resentment that had been growing under her skin since the day she entered our lives. "I never asked him to choose," I said quietly. She leaned forward, eyes glinting. "No, but you made sure he wouldn't have to." "You've been poisoning him against me since the start." "That's not true, Cassandra." I've only ever wanted him to be happy. Happy? She repeated, her voice rising. You think he's happy? He's miserable because he's still chained to you. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her anger, something unstable. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were cold, focused. Cassandra, please, I said, trying to steady my voice. You need to calm down. This isn't the way. But she cut me off with a low, sharp laugh. Calm down? Oh, Marlene, you really don't get it, do you? You've already taken everything from me. I felt my heartbeat thudding in my ears. What are you talking about? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You'll regret crossing me, Marlene. You'll lose him like you lost your husband. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air left the room. My husband's death, the details had never been public. Hardly anyone knew what really happened. My voice came out in a whisper. How do you know about that? Her lips curved into a slow, chilling smile. Oh, I know a lot more than you think. She turned then, picking up her purse as if nothing had happened. At the door, she paused, glancing back at me one last time. Tell Isaac I'll be in touch, she said softly. And tell him to start telling you the truth for once. Then she was gone, leaving the faint trace of perfume and something darker, the sense that a storm had just passed through. I sank onto the couch, my knees weak, her words echoing over and over in my mind. She shouldn't have known. She couldn't have known. Unless someone had told her, or she'd found something she shouldn't have. And as I sat there in the silence of my living room, one thing became painfully clear. Cassandra's disappearance wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. That one sentence ripped through me. She knew something she shouldn't have. You'll lose him like you lost your husband. The words replayed in my head long after Cassandra had left, heavy and poisonous. My husband's death wasn't something people talked about. I'd buried the truth deep years ago, locking it away with the pain that came with it. The world believed it was an accident, a tragic fall at the construction site where he worked. But there had been more to it. So much more. Only a handful of people had ever known what really happened. That he'd been accused of financial misconduct at work, something he didn't have the chance to defend himself against before he died. Isaac had been too young to understand back then. I'd protected him from it all, shielding him from the whispers, the headlines, the shame. How could Cassandra possibly know? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the glow of a single lamp stretching long shadows across the floor. My heart pounded every time I thought of her smirk, her casual cruelty. She'd known exactly where to stab, and she'd done it without hesitation. By morning, I was done guessing. I needed answers. I started where she'd left her trail, my husband's old files. After he passed, I had boxed up his belongings and stored them in the attic. I hadn't opened them in nearly 20 years. Dust coated the cardboard boxes like a thin film of memory. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid and sifted through his life documents, photos, handwritten notes, pieces of a man I had once known so well. There, near the bottom, I found an old envelope marked private. Inside were letters from his former employer, the ones that had sparked the scandal. But as I flipped through them, I found something else. A recent document printed on clean, modern paper slipped between the old ones. My heart skipped. It was a photocopy of one of those letters, but it had a fresh watermark from a nearby law firm. Someone had requested these records recently. And I didn't need to guess who. I called the law firm immediately, disguising my voice as best I could. "This is Mrs. Hayes," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm following up about the document retrieval from my late husband's file. Could you tell me who authorized the copies?" After a pause, the clerk replied, "Yes, that was requested by Cassandra Hayes." Hearing her name said aloud like that made my blood run cold. She'd used Isaac's last name, his name, even before the wedding was finalized. She'd dug into my past deliberately. She had gone out of her way to unearth the one thing I'd spent years trying to bury. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Cassandra hadn't just stumbled onto my past, she'd paid to uncover it. But why? What could she possibly gain from reopening old wounds that had nothing to do with her? And then I remembered something Lacey had told me. Cassandra wanted control. That was when everything clicked. Isaac's father had left behind not only a modest inheritance but also investment funds that had grown steadily over the years. I was the executor, meaning Cassandra couldn't touch a cent without my approval. She must have found out about the fund's existence and wanted leverage. My husband's scandal, if she could twist that story, use it to portray me as untrustworthy, she could convince Isaac to take control of the inheritance himself. Then she'd have full access to the money through him. The realization made my stomach churn. She wasn't just vindictive, she was strategic. Every kind smile, every moment of false warmth, every polite thank you had been a move in her game. I spent the rest of the day pacing, trying to steady my thoughts. My heart ached, not just for myself but for my son. He had no idea the woman he loved had been planning this long before their engagement. That evening, I sat down and began compiling everything: my husband's documents, the bank records showing the forged payment, the law firm's confirmation. Each page added weight to the truth I was uncovering. I placed them all into a single folder labeled Proof. And then, just as I finished, my phone buzzed. A message from Cassandra. "You shouldn't have gone digging, Marlene. Some things are better left buried." No greeting, no signature. Just that one line. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. She knew what I'd found. Somehow, she was watching me, maybe through Isaac, maybe through someone else. I turned off my phone and locked the doors. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too exposed. The next morning, I went to Isaac's apartment. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I needed him to see the truth. But when he opened the door, I immediately saw the exhaustion in his face, dark circles, red eyes, tension carved into every line. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "this isn't a good time." "Isaac, please," I said softly, holding the folder against my chest. "You need to hear this." He hesitated, torn, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was a mess: half-packed boxes, clothes scattered, a photo frame of Cassandra and him face down on the coffee table. "What happened?" I asked. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "She called last night, said you've been hiding things from me, said you ruined Dad's name and that's why you've been controlling everything." I swallowed hard. "Isaac, that's not true. She's lying to you. She's been digging into my past to manipulate you." He looked away. "Then why would she know things I don't?" "Because she'd stolen them," I wanted to scream. "Because she's playing you." But I didn't. Instead, I placed the folder on the table. "Read it," I said. "And then decide what's real." He didn't touch it right away. He just sat there, silent, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then believe this: everything I've ever done has been for you. You're my son, Isaac. I'd never hurt you." He didn't respond. I left the folder there and walked out, my heart breaking. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. I looked back at his window and saw the faint flicker of light. He was still sitting there. I could only hope he'd open that folder and finally see Cassandra for who she really was. Because now, it wasn't just about clearing my name, it was about protecting my son from a woman who would destroy him just to win. I knew it was time to end the silence. Enough of the fear, enough of the whispers, enough of the humiliation Cassandra had wrapped me in, like a web. She had taken everything good in my life, my reputation, my relationship with my son, even the peace of my own home, and turned it into something fragile, tainted. But now I had proof. I wasn't the delusional, meddling mother she painted me as. I was the woman she had underestimated. 2 days after leaving the folder with Isaac, I decided I wouldn't wait any longer. If he hadn't read it yet, I would tell him myself. But before I could, fate intervened. It was early evening when my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. For a moment, I almost didn't answer. But something in me said I should. When I picked up, all I heard at first was silence. Then a voice I recognized immediately. "Still playing detective, Marlene?" My chest tightened. "Cassandra." She laughed softly. "You really should stop. It doesn't suit you." "What do you want?" I said. forcing my voice to stay steady. I already have what I want, she said coolly. Isaac knows who you really are now. He won't believe you, no matter what you show him. You're lying, I said, though part of me feared she wasn't. Am I? She whispered. Ask him what he found in your husband's files. Oh wait, you wouldn't want to open those wounds again, would you? My throat tightened. What are you doing to him? Nothing, she said, almost sweetly. Just helping him see the truth. He deserves to know everything his perfect mother kept hidden. And then the line went dead. For a moment, I just stood there in the middle of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, my pulse thundering. Cassandra was unraveling fast, or maybe she'd never been stable to begin with. Either way, she was dangerous, and I knew I had to move quickly before she caused more damage. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: the bank records, the forged email, the law firm confirmation, and put them in a binder. If she wanted a war, I was ready for one. But just as I was about to leave the house to see Isaac, there was a sharp knock on my door. I hesitated before opening it, and when I did, my blood ran cold. Cassandra stood there again. She looked different this time, disheveled, desperate. Her lipstick was smeared, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. I kept the door half closed. You need to leave, Cassandra. This is over. She shook her head slowly, a manic smile curling her lips. No, Marlene, you don't get to end this. You think you can take my husband away? My future? I didn't take anything, I said. You destroyed that yourself. She stepped closer, forcing me to retreat slightly. You don't understand. Isaac was supposed to love me. He was supposed to listen to me, but he still calls you. He still defends you. You've poisoned him. I'd never seen someone unravel so quickly. Her calm, perfect composure was gone, replaced by raw, pulsing hatred. I've seen your proof, she hissed. You think those papers mean anything? Isaac won't believe a word of it. And then she made a mistake. She said, that fake payment you're so proud of finding, you'll never prove I did it. The account's long gone. My heart skipped. What did you just say? She froze, realizing her slip. I stepped forward, my voice firm. You said fake payment. So you admit it then? Her eyes widened, panic flickering for a second before she tried to recover. You're twisting my words. No, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. I'm recording this. Her gaze darted to the device, and her entire expression shifted from arrogance to rage. You think that'll save you? She spat, lunging forward. I stumbled back as she grabbed at the phone, her nails scraping my hand. Give it to me, she shouted. Get out, Cassandra, I yelled. It's over. She kept clawing, desperate, until I managed to shove her back and dart into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I locked it and called Isaac. He didn't answer the first time, or the second. On the third call, his tired voice came through. Mom? Isaac, I said, my voice trembling. She's here. Cassandra's here at my house. She just admitted everything. I have it recorded. You need to come now. There was a long pause on the other end. Then I heard the sound of him moving, fast. Don't open that door. I'm coming. 20 agonizing minutes later, I heard his car in the driveway. When I cracked open the door, Cassandra was gone, vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. Isaac ran inside, his face pale. Mom, are you okay? I handed him the phone. Listen. He frowned but pressed play. And then her voice filled the room, furious, unfiltered, damning. He listened in silence, his expression changing with every word. By the end, he looked like someone who'd just watched his entire world collapse. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Oh my God, he whispered. She really did this. I sat beside him, unsure whether to feel relief or heartbreak. I had my son back, but the cost of truth had been devastating. I'm so sorry, Mom, he said finally, his voice breaking. I should have believed you. I placed my hand over his. You couldn't have known, she fooled everyone. For the first time in months, the air between us felt clear, fragile, but honest. We sat there for what felt like hours, both silent, both processing everything. And though I didn't say it out loud, a small, bitter part of me couldn't help but think, Cassandra wasn't finished yet. Because women like her don't vanish quietly, they come back for one final strike, and I could feel it in my bones that her last act was still waiting to unfold. Isaac couldn't believe what he heard. He sat there frozen. The recording still playing faintly from my phone, Cassandra's voice, twisted with rage, confessing everything she'd tried so hard to hide. Each word peeled back another layer of illusion, and I could see the disbelief in his eyes turning to horror. When the audio finally ended, silence filled the room. Not the comfortable kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that follows a revelation you can't unhear. Isaac leaned back, covering his face with both hands. I don't understand, he murmured. She said you were lying, that you hated her, that you wanted to destroy our marriage. His voice broke on the last word. But she's the one who... He stopped, unable to finish. I wanted to comfort him, to take away the pain I could see tearing him apart, but there was nothing I could say that would soften the truth. The woman he'd planned to spend his life with had built that life on deceit. She was never in love with me, he said quietly after a long pause. Was she? I hesitated. She was in love with what you had, Isaac. With control. With power. People like Cassandra don't love people, they love what people can give them. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. I reached over and took his hand. No, sweetheart. You believed what she wanted you to believe. She was clever, she knew exactly how to twist things. That's not your fault. He let out a shaky breath and finally looked at me. What do we do now? The question hung in the air. For the first time in months, he was asking we. It made my chest ache with relief and sorrow all at once. We tell the truth, I said. You need to go to the police. Show them what she's done, the fraud, the forgery, the stolen money. He blinked. You think it'll go that far? I nodded. It already has. The next few days blurred together in a haze of phone calls, paperwork, and tense visits to the police station. Isaac handed over my recording and the folder I'd compiled. I watched him as he spoke to the detective, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't the naive man who had walked into that church months ago. There was something hardened in him now, something that comes only from betrayal. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Cassandra had left behind a digital trail that even she couldn't erase: forged accounts, financial manipulations, emails sent under fake identities. It turned out my case wasn't the only one. There were other victims, other families she'd infiltrated, always charming her way in, always walking away with something valuable. Isaac stayed with me during that time, unable to return to the apartment he'd shared with her. Nights were the hardest. I'd hear him pacing, his voice breaking as he muttered apologies I didn't need. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch until dawn, staring at the dark horizon like it might hold answers. One evening he asked me quietly, "Do you ever think she'll regret it?" I shook my head. People like Cassandra don't feel regret. They only feel loss when their lies stop working. He nodded slowly, looking down. Then, I guess she's about to feel that. And she did. A week later, we got the call. Cassandra had been found not hiding but moving on. She was living under a false name 2 states away, working at a luxury boutique. She'd already started courting another wealthy man. When the police arrived, she didn't resist. She just smiled, as if the whole thing were some sort of performance she'd been waiting to finish. Isaac and I sat together as the detective explained that she'd been charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and falsifying records. My son said nothing at first, just stared at the floor. Then he whispered, "I can't believe I ever loved her." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You loved who you thought she was. There's no shame in that." He nodded, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. I didn't interrupt. Some wounds needed to bleed before they could heal. Over the following days, friends and relatives who had witnessed the chaos at the wedding started calling. Some apologized for believing Cassandra's version of events. Others just wanted to express shock. I smiled politely, accepted their sympathy. But inside, I was exhausted. The truth had finally come out, but the damage it left behind was deep. The worst part was watching Isaac grapple with his guilt. He stopped eating properly, rarely smiled, and barely left the house. I tried to remind him that we'd survived worse, that we could rebuild. But betrayal is a slow poison. It takes time to flush out. Late one night, as I sat in my living room reading through the final police report, Isaac appeared in the doorway. His eyes were red, his voice low. "She took everything," he said quietly. "But I'm still here, and so are you." I closed the file, stood, and hugged him tightly. "That's all that matters," I whispered. And that's more than she ever wanted. For the first time in a long while, I felt a fragile kind of peace settle between us. The storm had finally broken. But I knew life had changed forever. Trust wouldn't come easily again, not for him, not for me. Still, as we sat there in the soft glow of the lamp, I realized something important. The truth might have destroyed the illusion, but it also rebuilt what mattered most. Because sometimes, when the lies crumble, the love that survives them is stronger than anything that tried to break it. A week later, Cassandra's face was everywhere. On the news, on social media, plastered across gossip sites under headlines dripping with scandal. Runaway bride exposed in multi-state fraud scheme. Every detail of her deceit had been laid bare: the forged accounts, the fake identities, the trail of broken engagements and empty bank accounts she'd left behind. It was surreal seeing her smile, that same carefully constructed, picture-perfect smile staring back at me from a television screen. Only now, the world saw what I had seen too late, the darkness behind it. Isaac sat beside me on the couch, the remote clutched loosely in his hand. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The reporters' voices echoed faintly through the room. Authorities confirmed that Cassandra Hayes, also known by multiple aliases, was arrested outside a boutique in Charleston. Investigators say she used her marriages and relationships to defraud victims across several states. I watched Isaac's expression shift as the images flashed: Cassandra being led away in handcuffs, her hair disheveled, her defiance still visible in the tilt of her chin. There was no remorse in her eyes, only arrogance. Even in custody, she looked like she was still performing for an audience. Isaac's voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. "I don't even know who that person is." I glanced at him. "Neither did I said softly. The broadcast continued, listing her crimes in cold, factual tones, but every word felt personal. Each revelation cut deeper, confirming the truth I had already uncovered. She'd forged financial documents under Isaac's name. She'd used my bank details to funnel small sums into her fake accounts, building a paper trail that painted me as the manipulative one. She'd even contacted vendors from the wedding, pretending to be me, demanding refunds and threatening lawsuits. She had tried to erase me, piece by piece. When the segment ended, the screen went dark, leaving only our reflections, two exhausted faces, bound by the same pain. "I can't believe people thought she was innocent," Isaac muttered. "Even her friends are saying they had no idea," I sighed. "People like Cassandra don't wear their cruelty on their sleeves, they make it look like love." He nodded, his eyes distant. "She fooled me completely." I hesitated, then said, "You weren't the first, Isaac. And you won't be the last person she tried to manipulate. The difference is you saw through her before she could destroy you completely." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "I don't feel lucky." I reached out and placed my hand over his. "You are. You have the truth now. Most people never get that." The following days were a blur of messages and phone calls. Old friends, relatives, even distant acquaintances reached out after seeing the story. Some apologized for believing Cassandra's lies. Others offered sympathy, awkwardly trying to bridge the months of silence they'd kept while gossip swirled. But forgiveness didn't come easily, not for them, not for myself. I had spent too long blaming myself for every moment I hadn't seen the warning signs, for every smile I mistook as genuine. Isaac refused all interview requests. The press wanted his version of events, but he said no to every one. "I don't want to relive it," he told me. "I just want to move on." And yet, moving on was harder than either of us expected. Even after the police assured us Cassandra would be facing years in prison, her presence still haunted the edges of our lives. Every time my phone buzzed unexpectedly, I half expected it to be her. Every time Isaac stepped out, I worried she'd somehow find a way to reach him again. But slowly, things began to shift. One morning, Isaac made coffee for both of us, something he hadn't done since before the wedding. He handed me a mug and said, "Do you think I can ever trust someone again?" I took a sip before answering. "Yes, but it'll take time. Trust isn't about forgetting what happened, it's about remembering and choosing differently next time." He nodded thoughtfully. "You really believe that?" "I have to," I said. "Otherwise, people like her win." He smiled faintly. The first real smile I'd seen in weeks. Later that day, we went to the police station one last time to sign off on our statements. The detective, a kind older man named Rourke, looked at Isaac as he handed him a copy of the official report. "You're lucky your mother caught her trail," he said. "Women like Cassandra, they're chameleons. You'd be amazed how many lives they destroy before someone finally stands up to them." Isaac looked at me, his expression softening. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm starting to see that." When we got home, I found myself standing by the window, watching the autumn leaves drift down the street. For the first time in a long time, the house felt peaceful again. Still, a part of me couldn't stop thinking about Cassandra, about how she had smiled at me that very first day, shaking my hand and calling me Mrs. Hayes with that perfect, gentle tone. It was strange how monsters rarely looked like monsters when you first met them. Weeks passed, and slowly the whispers faded. Cassandra's name stopped appearing in headlines. Life began to resume its quiet rhythm. Isaac started going out again, reconnecting with old friends, even returning to work. I could see the life coming back into him, bit by bit. One evening, he came home with a calm I hadn't seen in months. "Mom," he said, "there's someone I'd like you to meet soon." I smiled, though my heart skipped a beat. "Someone?" He nodded. "Not yet, it's too soon. But she's different, kind, real." I didn't push. I just nodded and said, "When you're ready." As he walked away, I realized that despite everything, hope was still possible. Cassandra had taken so much, but she hadn't taken that. Because even in the aftermath of her lies, truth had finally taken root, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like it might actually grow. Months later, I returned to the same church, not for a wedding, but for closure. The heavy oak doors creaked just the same. The faint scent of lilies still hung in the air, and the sunlight still poured through the stained glass windows like melted gold. But this time I wasn't here as a mother of the groom or a target of humiliation. I was here as a woman, finally ready to breathe again. It had taken nearly a year for the ache to fade, not the pain of betrayal itself, but the heaviness it left behind. Betrayal has a way of clinging to you, staining even the quiet moments. For a long time I couldn't walk through town without hearing whispers. People remembered the wedding, the spectacle, the scandal that followed. Even after Cassandra's arrest and conviction, some still stared, curious or pitying, as if trying to imagine what it felt like to be the woman told to get out of her own son's wedding. But I wasn't ashamed anymore. As I walked down the empty aisle, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor, I thought about everything that had happened since that day. Isaac had healed in ways I hadn't expected. The quiet, guilt-ridden man who once sat slumped in my living room had found his footing again. He was laughing more, living more. And he wasn't alone anymore. He'd met someone, Evelyn, a kind, grounded woman who saw him for who he was, not for what he could give. I'd met her too. The first time I saw them together, I watched how gently she placed her hand on his, how her eyes softened when he spoke. There was no power game, no hidden motive, just simple, honest love. That day, when Isaac introduced her, I realized something I hadn't before. Pain can build walls, but truth can break them just as easily. Cassandra had left scars on both of us, but Evelyn had helped remind my son what trust felt like again. And through him, she reminded me too. As I reached the altar, I looked at the spot where everything had fallen apart, where Cassandra's voice had shattered the air and my heart all at once. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering the stunned silence, the gasps, the humiliation. But when I opened them, it didn't hurt anymore. It felt distant, like watching a storm from behind glass. Time has a strange way of dulling the edges of even the sharpest memories. I sat in the front pew, folded my hands, and whispered softly, "You didn't win, Cassandra." Because she hadn't. She had tried to isolate me, to destroy the bond I had with my son, to rewrite the story of my life, but all she'd done was reveal my strength. The woman who walked out of that church that day had been broken. The woman sitting there now was whole again. I thought of the last time I'd seen Cassandra in the courtroom. She'd refused to look at me, sitting there in her tailored suit, her hair neatly styled, as if pretending she still had control. When the judge read her sentence, she didn't flinch, not once. But just before the guards led her away, she turned her head slightly, not toward me, but toward Isaac. Her lips curved into a small, almost mocking smile, as if to say, "You'll never forget me." But we had. Her name had become a shadow that no longer haunted us. Isaac and Evelyn's wedding had been a quiet one, small, intimate, full of laughter and light. I'd stood beside my son proudly, watching him smile without the weight of deception. I hadn't cried because of loss that day. I'd cried because of joy. After the ceremony, Evelyn had hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for raising such a good man." Those words meant more than she could have known. It was everything I'd ever wanted to hear. And now, sitting in that same church where my dignity had once been stripped away, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I rose from the pew and walked toward the altar one last time. My fingers brushed the edge of the marble rail, the cool surface grounding me in the present. "You did it," I murmured to myself. "You survived." Outside, the sky was streaked with pink and gold as the sun began to set. The air was warm, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the nearby park. Life had moved on, and so had I. For so long I'd defined myself by loss, the loss of my husband, the betrayal of Cassandra, the distance that once existed between my son and me. But now, I saw things differently. Every wound, every humiliation, every sleepless night had led me here stronger, wiser, and freer than I'd ever been. As I reached the church doors, I paused and looked back one last time. That place had witnessed my downfall and my redemption. It had seen me humiliated, and it had seen me rise. I smiled softly. "Goodbye," I whispered. When I stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushed against my face, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. I walked down the steps slowly, savoring the feeling of each step, not rushing, not running, just moving forward. At the bottom of the steps, I saw Isaac waiting beside his car, waving at me with that familiar grin. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, smiling warmly. They hadn't needed to come, but they had anyway, just to make sure I wasn't alone. As I walked toward them, Isaac opened his arms, and I let myself be held by the very person I had once feared losing. He whispered, "You okay, Mom?" I nodded, resting my head briefly on his shoulder. Better than okay. We stood there for a moment, the past finally behind us. The sun dipped lower, casting everything in a golden glow that felt almost symbolic, a quiet, gentle ending. Because that day, for the first time, I truly walked away from the past, and I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't walking away alone. Today, I stand stronger than ever, not just as a mother, but as a woman reborn. Life has a way of breaking you apart and then handing you the pieces back, waiting to see what you'll build from them. For a long time, I thought, I'd never be whole again. I thought the humiliation, the betrayal, the loss of trust would define me forever. But time, it turns out, has its own quiet magic. It doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into wisdom. Isaac and Evelyn are married now. Their wedding was simple, heartfelt, and beautiful, the kind that doesn't need grandeur to feel perfect. As I walked my son down the aisle this time, my steps were steady, my heart light. There was no fear, no tension, no ghost from the past whispering in my ear. Only love. When the priest asked who was giving the groom away, I smiled and said, "He's giving himself to love, freely." And for the first time, I felt like those words weren't just about him. They were about me, too. I had finally given myself permission to let go of the bitterness, of the resentment, of the version of myself that had lived in Cassandra's shadow. Evelyn glowed with quiet joy that day, her hand resting on Isaac's arm as if to say, "You're safe now." Watching them exchange vows brought tears to my eyes, not because of sadness, but because of how full my heart felt. This was what I had always wanted for him. A love that didn't demand pain in exchange for affection. A love that healed instead of hurt. After the ceremony, during the small reception in the garden behind the church, Isaac found me standing alone near the fountain. "You're thinking too much again," he teased gently, his voice filled with warmth I hadn't heard in so long. I laughed softly. "Mothers never stop thinking, Isaac. It's what we do." He smiled, pulling me into a hug. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything. For not giving up on me." I held him tighter, whispering, "I never could." The past year had changed us both. He'd learned what it meant to trust wisely, to recognize love's true shape, and I'd learned what it meant to stand on my own, without guilt or fear. After the guests left and the sun dipped low, I sat on one of the garden benches, watching the lanterns sway in the evening breeze. I thought about how much had happened in such a short time, the chaos, the heartbreak, the fight for truth. And yet, here I was, still standing, still breathing, still alive in ways I hadn't been before. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about Cassandra not with hatred, but with a strange kind of acceptance. People like her thrive on control, on chaos, on making others small so they can feel significant. But when the lies crumble, they're left with nothing. I don't wonder where she is now, or if she ever thinks about us. She no longer lives in my head, or my heart. She's just gone. And in her absence, I found myself again. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter a few months after the trial ended. The first time I stood in front of a group of women, some broken, some rebuilding, I told them my story. Not the tabloid version, not the scandal, but the truth. How losing everything gave me back my voice. How standing up to manipulation didn't destroy me, it freed me. One of the women, her eyes swollen from tears, told me afterward, "You make it sound survivable." "It is," I told her. "It doesn't feel like it at first. But it is." And I meant it. Life now feels quieter, softer, the kind of peace that doesn't demand attention. I wake up early, water the garden, listen to the birds outside my window. Isaac calls almost every day, not out of obligation but out of love. Sometimes, he and Evelyn visit on weekends, bringing laughter and warmth back into the house that had once felt haunted. I travel too. I go places I used to only dream about: small coastal towns, mountain trails, art museums, and cities I'd never seen. I've learned to live for myself again, without apology. But every now and then, something small reminds me of that turning point, the word that changed everything. Get out. It used to echo in my mind like a wound reopening. But now it sounds different. It sounds like release. Like the universe was forcing me to step out of a life I didn't know was suffocating me. Because maybe that's what growth really is, learning that sometimes, when the world tells you to get out, it's not rejection, it's redirection. The night after Isaac's wedding, I sat by the window of my bedroom, the moonlight spilling across the floor, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for truth, for second chances, for survival. I thought about the woman I used to be, scared, ashamed, desperate for approval, and smiled. She deserved better, and now, finally, she had it. I turned off the light, closed my eyes, and breathed in the peace I'd fought so hard to find. Because the day I walked away from that church, I thought I was walking away in defeat, but I wasn't. I was walking toward freedom, and I've never walked alone since.